Hey everybody, welcome back to your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We've got some great articles we're going to be talking about today. We're going to find out who or where the women of AI are. We're going to be talking about synthetic training in the U.S. Air Force and what that word means and its significance. We're also going to be talking about good use of AI for air traffic control. Really excited about that. Some research out of Johns Hopkins. And we're going to start the show off with a AI controversy, including Sports Illustrated. We've got some great guests to discuss these topics today. I'm going to start with Tracy. Tracy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm retired Lieutenant Colonel Tracy LaTourette, call sign JackieO. I'm known as Colorado's First Lady Fighter Pilot, and I flew the F-16 for years. My job now is as a speaker and high-performance coach, and I recently had the opportunity to host Behind the Wings, the F-35 episode for Wings Over the Rockies Museum. So I'm excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you. We also have Matthew West. So Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew West. I'm the founder and president of Hawk AeroSafety LLC, working in aviation safety and risk management, helping organizations reach peak safety in their aviation operations, both manned and unmanned. My former life, I've been a commercial helicopter pilot, a police helicopter pilot, and then moving into the world of safety with one of the country's largest air ambulance operators. And in more recent times, helping them go on the way to setting up a drone program for medical deliveries. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you, and we're going to move right along to our first article, which is mine today. So Sports Illustrated is the latest media company damaged by an AI experiment gone wrong. Everybody might remember what happened with CNET when they kind of got caught with their pants down using AI. So this piece is an opinion piece on some level, because it definitely says that Sports Illustrated probably will face some reputational damage. I am apt to agree with that opinion, because it's one thing to use AI copywriters, which I think for a lot of people actually isn't that big a deal if you're talking about something like stock reports, as long as they're accurate, or even sports scores. But it does kind of reek pretty bad when you are willing to use these writers and misrepresent them as real people and real writers. Not only is that offensive to real writers that do work, it's also a little bit fraudulent. So what happened here, though, Sports Illustrated is claiming that they are not the perpetrators of said fraud, and that they're kind of pushing the liability off to a third-party firm called Advon, which they utilized to write these articles. And how they got caught, Futurism had found that one of the writers' headshots was actually on an AI-generating headshot website, which is ironic because they could have generated the headshot, but they just used the stock one, so it was actually easier to find. I also dug up some of the other publications that Advon is servicing according to their website, and you might notice some of these names: Real Simple, Better Home and Gardens, In Style, People, Mashable, Hollywood Life, Health, Travel, Leisure, Southern Living, Food and Wine, Cooking Light, Wood Magazine, never heard of that, but I imagine it's about woodworking, and PC Mag. And I mean, this is quite a list for a company I've never heard of. But hey, they got a pretty good client base, which means that many of the articles that you're probably reading today and tomorrow are going to be increasingly AI generated, especially the kind of non-consequential stuff that kind of just gets us by on a day-to-day. So, Tracy, what are your thoughts on this AI controversy?
Well, I love that you picked this article. I think AI is popping up everywhere, in different ways. And I think this article just really highlights how maybe not just the American people, but around the globe, I feel like there's an increasing lack of trust in what we're seeing in the media, in journalism. I think the pandemic was kind of the beginning of a shift in our natural ability to just trust the things that we're reading, that we're seeing, and which I do think is unfortunate. Sports Illustrated has been around a long time. They've always established themselves with a certain reputation, and I do think that this is damaging. I mean, but I say shame on them for number one, for blaming the other people, for blaming a third party. Okay.
Right. You have to audit what gets published in your work. Yeah.
100%. I mean, you are ultimately responsible for what you publish. I mean, you hire other people to bring in an ad, to what you are producing, but you're ultimately responsible. And so I'm disappointed in the increased lack of trust that this misstep has created. And it kind of feels like, they call it an experiment, but it very much feels like, what can we get away with? How much can we get away with before people start to notice? Well, guess what? We are a lot smarter than we were a few years ago. And now, the lack of integrity is kind of what people are starting to expect. But, I do have to say, long term, I don't think that the reputation damage is going to sustain, because I think we're going to continue to see these kinds of problems all over media, with lots of different organizations misusing and trying to cheat by with AI. It's not just kids and their papers trying to turn in other people's work anymore. The adults are doing it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I might argue that actually all journalism's reputation is generally harmed by this. So maybe not specific publications, depending on whatever their business model is, but I think the environment is less trustworthy now, and AI in general is hurting the concept of the open internet, because it's able to scrape and then use that information. So the more fraudulent information that people get out of free but supposedly trusted sources that turns out to be incorrect or fraudulent, we're just going to start tuning it out, because like you said, we are smarter than these stupid people in charge over there are giving us credit for. And that mentality is really starting to backfire when it comes to these AI tools. People thinking that, it's almost like a slight hatred of people and the work they do. It's like, nobody will notice that my writer was replaced. They give me too much guff about the things they want to write anyway. Let's just get rid of them. And then, you know what? The readers are smarter than you think. Matt, what do you think about this?
You hit some really important points there. I think the most important for me, these tools are now prevalent, and they're integrated into everything we do. Give you an example. I do e-learning solutions where, I'm building online training, and these platforms now have an easy button, I call it, where it actually, will take your guidance, and it will just go and create the lesson for you, or there's a use for the tool to help you in what you're doing creatively. But it's become so easy, like creating a website. Now you can just enter a short description and it'll go and run with it. Now that's fine if you're declaring it, but I think what you mentioned about the creative aspect of it, we have a really smart populace out there who can see these things, and it's really obvious when something's been written by ChatGPT. You read through the content and it doesn't flow, especially for people that know me and my content. It's obvious when it's been written, and that information's been scraped. It's a personal approach that always gets the most engagement. That's the reason people went to these kind of publications in the first place, was for that unique content. And you get that feeling from someone when there's an author that you like. You can sense that tone through the actual text, whereas ChatGPT doesn't have that. The content might be perfectly correct, or any AI tool. I don't want to focus on ChatGPT, but you can read through, and there isn't that heart in there that you might have gone to one of those publications and a particular submitter for.
Yeah, I'm gonna, if I can, I want to chime in, because I think there's a thread here, kind of the role of humans, right? And we're going to see this in some of the other articles we're going to talk about as well. But being a human, all of us being human, maybe we're biased, but I feel like humans need to be involved. And just like a drone, just like an F-35, they're a tool. And, whether you put automation in there, that's one thing, but to kind of unleash total control without any human involvement, I think is when things go awry, whether it's in the arts or in journalism, as in this case, or, pick an automated vehicle, because there are just things that humans know and do and experience that the algorithms can't quite capture, at least yet. So I think that is the concern. And we're seeing it here. I agree with you 100%, Matt. Like, you can tell when something's been written by ChatGPT. You can try to scrape some stuff as a baseline just to get maybe some information, just so you're not just Googling. Like, I think that's a great use. But then it has to be you, right? Like, because if you just use what they give you, you're going to get some rote list. You're going to get a whole bunch of redundant stuff, right? I think I saw this recently where I had someone do some work for me, and I'm like, hey, I can tell you use ChatGPT for this, and I don't have a problem with it. But you got to read the thing yourself, the original text, right? You have to read what they're telling you, and then you have to like fix it, because you cannot just rely on it. That's just been my personal experience with it.
On that front, I've been really upset with a lot of tech people that I deal with lately, passing ChatGPT off to me rather than actually investing in a response or crafting even an intelligible bio for themselves. And it's kind of frustrating when you hear people say things like, oh, well, can't you imagine what it will be? Yeah, but it's not that now, so stop throwing this crap on me. Like, if it works, it works, and I think you need to have these systems verifiable. Looks like we lost Tracy for a second, so I'm going to try to get her back on. Let's see if we got the right one. No, that one.
Yeah, we can
Yes,
hear you.
we can hear you.
Can you see me?
There you go.
Hey, we can see
We
you now.
got you.
Okay. No
Okay.
worries.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I'd
I
love
took a
to
look
jump
back
in on
at
this
Jaron.
again.
What
Go ahead,
you-
Matt.
I apologize. Sorry. I just, while it's fresh in my mind, I think one thing that we miss a lot is it's a tool, and it's a
Yes.
tool like it by anyone. Anyone can use to use correctly or exploit. And I think one thing is we're creating this whole industry around this, where you look on YouTube or social media, there's people that make a career purely by using these tools to make a name for themselves or a channel or whatever it is, but without any content. We're doing a great podcast here where we've got lively conversation and reality behind it. But there's people out there that are making careers off this and making money purely by using these tools, fully automated and with no real content. And but I think, again, we're talking about the life we live in now, where it's content. It's the guy at Sports Illustrated was probably under a time constraint and thinking they might be able to use these tools to speed up their time and reduce their workload. Why wouldn't you? I mean, I would do the same. But
Matt, just like there was a lawyer actually that submitted a brief to the court that had used ChatGPT to write it, had a whole bunch of cases in there that were completely fictitious. And, almost got in. I mean, that's there, we've got professional rules of responsibility, like candor to the court, candor to the tribunal is one of them. And, you violate that. I mean, that's significant. You can lose your license to practice law. And he got slapped hard. Ultimately, they didn't disbar him, but that's another example. So it's not just like journalists. We're talking, significant career fields and professionals using AI, and, just buyer beware. I mean, no joke. Like, you cannot cite a case that doesn't exist. How could you possibly do that?
Yeah, well, part of that is the marketing, which is, I think, it's misrepresentative, at least on a minimal level. Like, these are not human replacements. These are human-like tools. So they respond in human language, natural language processing, but that doesn't mean that they have any thought behind them. And that's kind of the most frustrating thing about it. We're going to move on to the next article, though, because I think it kind of dovetails into what we're talking about here, some of the issues with representation. So why are we getting some of these weird responses? Dawn, what's this article and why did you pick it?
Yeah, this is mine, and gotta love that picture of Sam Altman looking wonderful there. But we talked
there aren't
about
many good
Sam
angles
last
for him.
week or the last show. He was out from OpenAI, then he's back in, and I kind of glommed onto this article for a couple of reasons. One, it's really talking about the lack of diversity in AI, and particularly in OpenAI. With this whole controversy. A lot of those board members that had originally ousted Altman were ultimately asked to leave. And that included the very small handful of women that were on that board, all replaced by white men. So there's no females on the board right now, at least according to this article. And the author used it as a launch pad to talk a little bit about the lack of diversity and the gender gaps in AI and in technology in general. Some facts here quoted, things like men have been quoted 3.7 times more in AI news, that AI articles, let's see, Altman mentions blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the top 100 AI influencers list is very, there's not very many female representatives on that. And, why do we care? Okay, it's not just about, oh, look, there's no women here. The issue is perspectives, and the issue is bias also. So if you've got a company that's out in front kind of influencing the development of AI, not just on the technology side, but on the policy side, very significant ways. And you don't have a lot of different perspectives at the table that can give you those guardrails against ingraining bias into the process from the very start. That's a problem. And, it's kind of disappointing that people were fired because they disagreed with Sam, right? Because it's like, isn't that the point? I mean, I think it was Lincoln that would gather kind of naysayers around him purposefully.
Team of Rivals.
The Team of Rivals. Yeah, that's a book. There's a book about this, because as a leader, you don't want to surround yourself with everybody that has the same exact ideas and mindset and views as you. You want to be challenged, because you know what? Guess what? They might actually have a point. Something your team, if it's homogenous, might never have thought of. And there are tons of statistics and information out there that diverse teams are winning teams. Why? For that very reason, because you're getting all kinds of different ideas that can make, whether it's a product, an article, an AI even better. So I'll just leave it at that. And that's really why I picked it. Obviously, as a woman, it spoke to me as well. But that's the reason why I picked this article.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
I love the article, and I think that's one thing you picked out there, Dawn, I didn't really think about, which was keeping a team around you that's challenging you and challenging your thoughts. And for me, it's perception. External, how does the organization look in this situation? With, you've got now narrowed your team. You look worse externally in the organization. But for me, in safety, one thing I've always worked around is the fact that it isn't what you do, it's how you're perceived in doing it. In, like, say, for example, I'm training up people in safety internally. It doesn't matter what the company says they do or you actually do. It's how they perceive what you're selling, and that's their engagement is based on that. So how does the internal team feel about this? This lack of diversity in a team. You want to be challenged the whole time. That's how you make a better product. That's how you provide a better service. But if you've got less people around you, and suddenly you start to get subculture formation internally as well, I think there's a lot more here than you realize. But no, I agree completely. I think the more diverse the team, the more challenged you are, the better product and service you come out with. But yeah, there's for me, I see here definitely an external image thing and an internal image thing. These perceptions internally, I can't imagine what those teams are thinking now internally, following all these events. And externally, well, yeah, it never looks good, right?
Well, that you raise a great point about culture and leadership, and I would love to hear Tracy's perspective because look, people call her the first lady fighter pilot of Colorado. Think about that for a second. Look at her. She's young and she's the first one. So I can't even imagine what you experienced in that world, but I would love to hear your perspective on this article on technology and diversity.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry for the technical earlier. So I love that you picked this article, Don. I think it's really interesting to look at the whole deal. You know, they fired Sam Altman, brought him back. 2 women were fired. What I would really like to know is why were those women fired?
Oh, we got that answer for you.
You know, I mean, well, okay, well, what's the real reason why they were fired?
Because Helen specifically wrote a paper that said that there's no reason to accelerate AI research based on the idea that China is competing with us. So Sam has been stirring up a lot of fears in Washington based around that idea. So he was going to try to get her ousted from the board.
Okay,
so the board acted proactively, and then, I mean, this is the gossip anyway,
right,
according to major publications, New York Times, TechCrunch, etc. But Sam's the board's reaction to Sam, and then Sam basically wins because he was able to convince other board members, hey, you won't even have anything left if I'm taken away from this kingdom.
Mike, what was about the other woman?
I don't know the other woman, but she was just another board member. She was in agreement with Helen. She was part of the constituency of 4 that were supposedly completely against Sam and had manufactured this this whole firing kind of push. At least one of those, the guy, I forget his name, he came back to Sam and said, "I'm so sorry," and like basically, you know, put his head down on social media and said, "Forgive me, forgive me." So his spine is non-existent. And honestly, Helen has a NatSec background. She knew what she was talking about. Sam is a Y Combinator background. He knows how to make money, and money won on this one. And this points to another trend that in this sector, a lot of the safety people are women, and those are the ones that are getting fired. Emily Bender had written the paper Stochastic Parrots. She was let go from Google's safety team for AI. So this is not actually out of the ordinary, and it actually speaks to specifically what you were talking about, Dawn. Like, these are the people that are raising the questions about bias and safety, because flat out, these things are not as secure as I think even the creators thought they were. Google literally yesterday discovered that if you type the word poem as many times as it will let you fit into ChatGPT, it started giving you back training data. And then you could query the training data, and they were able to get private information and contact information and lawyer information and addresses and everything out of it. So they don't know how these things really, really work to pitch them as secure tools. And I think there's going to be a lot of backfire on that range. And Helen was one of the people, Emily from Google was one of the people who had actually been raising these concerns about these tools, which are great, but you have to use them in a very specific context to get good use out of them, and you shouldn't put any insecure information into them. And also, the information that's being put into them should be reviewed a lot more in a lot more detailed manner, because we're going to see some stuff blow back.
I'd like to take it back to Tracy and just ask you, you know, just kind of from your experience, when you have a homogenous team, a leadership team in particular, you know, how, you know, Matt raised a great point. How in your experience, I imagine you've seen this. How does that impact the workforce or the people that are aspiring to become those future leaders?
Well, yeah, that's why, you talk about a homogenous team versus a diverse team. Diversity of thought, I think, is so important. And that's why I raised the question, why were they really fired? Like, what is really going on behind what is the lowest level of agenda here? When I see true diversity of thought, what we have is an opportunity, like you talked about before. You get to hear the people that disagree with you. If you're not welcoming in that kind of what we call a red team atmosphere, where someone brings in the opposing ideas, then you're not preparing yourself for the battle that you're going to face when you leave the room. I mean, these are your friends, this is your team. And if your team is a bunch of yes men, yes women, we're all saying the same thing, oh yeah, whatever you want, then you're gonna get caught, with your pants down when you get out in the world. And I think it's very dangerous when you try to operate with a homogenous, when that's your goal, is just homogenous. Now, I think when you're looking at what you want everybody to be cohesive, right? We want everybody to be pursuing the same ideas, the same thoughts. We all want to be on the same thing, mission first. But when you eliminate anytime somebody disagrees with you, man, you're the emperor with no clothes. You're all those things. You have to be willing to hear the hard comments. That's why we debrief after every single mission. We close the doors, we hash out what worked and what didn't. And you know what? A lot of times when we make a mistake, it needs to come out, and we need to be able to talk about it and discuss it and hold each other to the fire and go, hey, this is what you should have done better, and hold each other accountable. And if everybody's just on the same page, just saying yes, whatever you say is good, like on a homogenous team, then I think then you really miss that.
Yeah, this is Sam's empire now, and I think he's going to face Musk level ego problems.
Yeah, I think Matt.
I mean, he already has some weird crypto crap.
Yeah, I think Matt has a comment.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that one of these individuals that was fired had a safety role, and that concerns me as a safety guy, right? Because how does that look now internally? Well, we've got the naysayer, who's the safety individual, a safety representative, who's now being ousted. Now the roadblocks are gone. We can continue. That's something that you see out in our industry, and that's scary when you see that, because what does that say to a company's culture? And especially a safety culture. That's a very scary thing to embrace.
Yeah, and Microsoft is an observer on the board now, but I think they very intelligently didn't place a board member, even though they could have easily done that after this whole kerfuffle, because that reduces their liability. I think they know that this is volatile, but they need OpenAI to push forward with a more experimental mindset than a giant corporation like Microsoft would tolerate. I know internally, Jaron Lanier, who wrote the article, "There is no AI," he works for Microsoft, and he's kind of spoken out against specifically the use of creators' materials in a non-attributable manner. But even having one naysayer within, the high up, he's second to the CTO at Microsoft, is not going to stop Sam. I think he really has a Musk level situation on his hand 3 years from now.
I wanted to kind of close this out, and Matt brought something up, honestly, I didn't think about, but it's really pretty obvious. The chilling effect this has on other people. So not only just looking around like these people don't look like me anymore, it's just like, whether it's a safety issue or some other issue, who is now going to open their mouths and say anything, even if it's something catastrophic? Could you imagine? Because they're now in self-preservation mode, where if I go against a grain, if I say something, then maybe I'm the one that's next on the chopping board. or the chopping block, and I can't afford that. So yeah, I think it's created a really, really bad situation, honestly. And I hope others can learn from this and not repeat this mistake. It'll be interesting to see how this ultimately plays out. But I would keep an eye on this and keep watching what happens here.
Yeah, those board members that flipped realized that they were going to be unhireable. So think about what that means.
Yeah.
And so the board members that didn't reflip, they had courage, and two of them were women. And I specifically think Helen is brilliant. I read her paper. I saw nothing wrong with it. So anyway, we're going to take a quick break. I want to thank our sponsors, Rubric Law, Aerovigilance, Centrix, and CSG Strategies for making this episode possible, and many others. We thank their support. And if anybody's out there today watching the episode, feel free to comment or ask questions. But we're going to move on to our next article, which is from Tracy. So what is the Air Force increasingly relying on it?
So what we're talking about here is a new way. It's not a new way, but it's another way to train pilots to be proficient in their job. Obviously, the first choice is what we refer to as air under your butt. Nothing can replace the actual air sense you get from being in the sky and flying the airplane and feeling how it feels and all those kinds of things. But there's a whole nother element to consider, and that's the fact that when you're actually flying the real airplane, there are some things that you don't want to learn in the airplane. When it comes to emergency procedures, being shot at by the bad guys. I mean, we simulate that in the air by having some forces pretend to be what we call red air, or the enemy force, and we practice flying against them in the air. But there is so much to be valued by flying in a simulated environment where you can create any scenario you want, any threat you may face. You can create a world where the teams of pilots can practice engaging against those kinds of threats in a safe environment, that synthetic environment. And it's an environment where you can stop, what we call freeze the problem, go back. When you debrief, you can refly out the whole scenario. You can see how a missile will fly out, how things would turn out real world if you engaged with your enemy in the air the way you did in the simulator. And the reason I picked this article was because I thought it was so cool to see that they're really working on, especially after I had just done all the research with the F-35 on behalf of the Wings Over the Rockies and the Behind the Wings episode that I got to do. I got to look at Lockheed Martin and the F-35. I got to fly their simulator. I got to learn a lot from the pilots that are flying these aircraft and how this amazing fifth generation fighter is being used today. And, the F-35, we have that as fifth generation. We have the F-22, also fifth generation. But what we're talking about in this article is being able to take not just the fifth generation fighters that we have, but also the legacy fighters and other airframes, and also ground forces, and combine them in this joint environment where we can bring everybody together and practice what we would do on the real battlefield. So they talk about Nellis Air Force Base, where there's this exercise that I used to do there called Operation Red Flag, and we'd bring in NATO forces from all over the world, and it was super intense. You'd have airplanes, all kinds of different airplanes in the same piece of sky. Very, very specific training that we would do on the ground before we did, and went and flew the air war, and then very specific debriefs afterwards. But what they're talking about doing here is creating a simulated environment that is on a new scale. It's on a new level where we can bring in the NATO forces, the Air Force, the Navy, Marines, that, like for the F-35, they all three fly the same aircraft. But to regularly be able to bring them together and to practice in this kind of environment where we can see what works and what doesn't. And it's way less expensive to be able to do the simulator training. I mean, getting the jets airborne, you have to worry about the weather, the maintenance, all these things. We can create this environment where we have this highly intense, very detailed, very focused simulated environment, then what that does for the experience of the pilots is extraordinary. We're able to accelerate everybody's experience and create a more cohesive force. And so I'm very excited about the advancements in the synthetic simulator training.
Is it are there any like hindrances that happen in terms of translating to real world? Because I think about somebody playing Call of Duty, that doesn't necessarily make them a sharpshooter, right? But it does seem like the Air Force has used simulation to train pilots for a long time now. And Dawn, you got
I want to
something?
jump in, Mike, because if you guys haven't watched the movie Gran Turismo, you should. It was out recently. I'm sure it's like on Netflix or something, but this was a kid that was just playing that video game Gran Turismo, and he would literally have to he'd have to build his, I think it was Formula One or some equivalent cars, and he just played it all the time. And they had a contest. This is a true story, by the way. They had a contest. Spoiler alert! And they grabbed a bunch of these kids that were world-class Gran Turismo players, and the idea was train them and then have them, drive in real races. And to this day, this guy is still driving. Like, he is amazing. And he had never stepped foot in one of these cars. It was all just literally a video game. And in fact, there was one point in the movie where there was something. The car started drifting, and he went to the mechanic, and he said, "This is the part. Like, this is the thing that you did wrong." And the guy's like, "What?" And he was right. And it's just because he was even building them, in this fake world, but he knew every nuance of it. And it's a true story. So just throwing that out there.
Well, Lewis Hamilton's brother, who is disabled, he actually was really good at the Formula One simulator, and they do have like a handicapped version of the race, which I think he did for a couple of years too. There is so I saw the documentary on that, and the biggest thing for him though, there was a transition for G-force that he was not accustomed to in the simulator, and that I think it's interesting you pick cars. That seems to be one thing that's very similar, right? You can't account for training with that, but you could go through the step process, like knowing why is my car a little wiggly in the back, or why I have oversteer or understeer. Yeah, you could kind of train that. But so I'm curious, Tracy, what are the actual limits you think?
Well, I love that you guys are talking about cars. I have a kid who actually drives Formula 4 cars and learned in the simulator. And that's how he trains is in a simulator. There's so much that does translate that allows you to, when you get in the airplane, you're comfortable, you're aware of your environment, you have what we call situational awareness of the things that are happening around you. You know what to expect. You can train at a more difficult and more dangerous level in the simulator than you ever would in the airplane. So the things that you do when you're flying, hopefully when you get in those situations, it's things that you've seen. Now you're talking about G-forces and things like that. Sure, nothing is going to be as accurate, as being able to pull G's and feel the blood being sucked out of your head, right? That's why you can't just replace being in the air altogether. But I think the benefit here is that we recognize that we don't get to fly enough as pilots. I mean, the most experienced pilots right now, is my understanding, is they're still in the Guard and Reserve. I mean, my Guard unit had guys who flew the airplane for 20 years, and we would work with active duty forces, and that's where the new lieutenants and the new hires are learning. They're cutting their teeth on flying fighters, and they get a little bit more practice than we get in the Guard, but you're still not able to get airborne as much as you want to. For example, on the Guard, it's 8 sorties a month as an inexperienced pilot. And the day you hit 100 hours, they dropped it to 6 sorties. So 6 times a month, I was allowed to get in the airplane and go fly. So imagine how much better life is when you can use those other days to hop in the simulator. And these are way more advanced simulators than we had when I first started flying. When you can get into these advanced simulators that really do a better job of creating that same kind of environment for you, then you're creating more reps, more opportunities to fly the mission in your head, and things become second nature.
My
Yeah,
God,
there's
an
that
hour
muscle
rule,
memory,
right?
right?
I'd love to hear Matt's thoughts.
It's funny because being a fellow aviator, but not quite to Tracy's level. Things are they seem a lot simpler in a helicopter. We don't have to fight G-forces unless I'm doing something really, really wrong. But I mean, but as Tracy will tell you, there's some things that you have to learn in the air. There's things you can simulate, but there's some things you simply can't simulate. Feeling is a very difficult thing to grasp, but there's so many things you can do in a simulator that you don't want to experience in an aircraft until you have to. Like there's some things you simply can't simulate, like a loss of hydraulic system. So now, how would you do that in a real aircraft? You simply can't. You can simulate that. Simulation itself has come on, like Tracy said, dramatically over the past, 20 years. But simulation's been going on, since the 40s, right? They had early simulators. But I think now it's catching up. We've got this wonderful technology. I've got as much, computing power now in my PC here that most simulators had before. The difference is now you're inside a box on a moving platform, and it's much more engaging. You're fully engaged. I've seen lots of organizations embrace virtual reality headsets now. And so you don't need the capital outlay to have one of these multi-million-dollar simulators like we had at my old air ambulance company. Multi-million-dollar level D simulators where you strap yourself into the box and you are immersed in this world, but you can do absolutely everything that aircraft will do. Every switch functions, and you'll sit in there and the instructor's behind you and says, okay, what do you want to do? Okay, I want to be on the top of Big Bear Mountain in California in a whiteout, and I want a crosswind from the left at 30 knots. And suddenly you're shooting an approach to a landing zone, and he's like, okay, you've just lost your tail rotor. How are you going to handle this? You can't do that in real life. And it's wonderful to see that the technology is catching up, because I think there was a time over the past 10 years where it kind of stalled out, and now the technology is catching up, but it is widely available. And I actually saw an article, and I think it was an Air Force Reserve unit, and they had PC-based systems, and all these guys lined up with their headsets on. And what a great use of limited resources too. You can't afford to put everyone in one of these full motion simulators, but I can afford 20 of these PCs with a full headset, and now we can again keep people up to date with just going through the motions and getting those repetitions in.
Yeah, there's really kind of Tracy, you got something?
Just one quick thing. You talk about the simulations, and I just want to point out that the military believes so strongly in their ability to train pilots in the simulator that the F-35 was built with A, B, and C variant, but no two-seater. I learned the F-16. I got 4 sorties with someone in my back seat before I soloed, and even as that airframe has gotten older over the years, and many of our B and D F-16 models, those are the two-seaters, have come to their end of their life phases. In many cases, they're just having so many problems. Pilots, even the last few years in the F-16, they simulate, and then their first time to fly is that first solo. And that's the way they designed it with the F-35. You sim, and you hop in the plane, and off you go. So there's got to be some faith in that system. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a convergence of 3 kind of bits of technology, right? You have the ability to simulate more accurate real world environments. Then there's the economy of scale that firms like Meta are providing because they're pushing this hardware to a certain level. And then it's also the military hardware. Now, like you said, there's that level of safety that they feel confident in a single pilot. So it's a whole new world of confidence that you can imbue on a pilot in training. So I just got one comment from Mark Genung. These environments enable multiple Navy warships, combat information centers to train using their onboard equipment and simulated environments. It's invaluable to prepare Navy battle groups. So seems like Air Force isn't the only people benefiting
No,
from
absolutely. This is
simulation.
joint. And by the way, Mark's out in Nevada. He runs their UAS test site out there. So thanks for chiming in, Mark. Appreciate you.
Yeah, nice to hear from you. All right, and Article 4 is going to be Matt's. So as drone traffic increases, researchers turn to AI to help avoid collisions. So more simulation. I feel like we've tied the bow really nice. Matt, tell us about your
And
article.
AI, yeah.
Yeah, this was an interesting article to me, and quite close to my heart, working in the UAS area and also being a helicopter pilot that butts up against this kind of airspace that they were talking about here. So most drones in the US are operating up to that 400 feet limit, but you know, as a police helicopter pilot, we're routinely sitting around 500 feet, you know, and sometimes, you know, lower when it comes to it. And so we're right in that area. But this was around a team of researchers from, it was the, let me get this right, the Institute for Assured Autonomy, Lanier Watkins, and it was linked through Johns Hopkins, where they're using AI simulation to test out different modes and methods for controlling the airspace. Because right now that's uncontrolled airspace, so we're relying on avoidance by drone technologies. And this was for me a perfect way of using AI in a sandbox, a controlled environment, to test these things out. What is AI really good at? It's really good at mimicking what we do as humans, which is a really hard thing to do, especially when you're talking about aviators, you know, like myself, and we've got different experience levels through there, and we've got different sizes of aircraft moving through there. So what we wanted in this situation, or the investigators to find, was how can we test out these in an environment that's safe? Again, we're going back to simulation, like Tracy's article here. So we're using AI to work out what would the average user do, but what happens when we have these extraordinary situations happen, where maybe a drone goes off mission, and suddenly, you know, we said to go from point A to point B, and suddenly it does a 180 and goes off and starts climbing out. You can do this in an environment that's safe, and you can throw as many different parameters out there, and the system can work around that and really get to grips with, okay, well, is our mitigation effective? You know, how are these systems responding individually? This, I really loved the way this was applied. And I think this is a perfect use for AI. But the thing is, right now, there's no restrictions on AI being integrated into current US technology. Dawn, tell me if I'm going off topic here, but like, I don't know anywhere where, you know, AI is being restricted into so onboard software for UAS.
So there is a limitation. It has to be baked. So it can't be actively learning about obstacle avoidance. It can't be learning on the job, but it can be trained by AI. Absolutely.
And I've worked with companies that have that built in, but we've already mentioned earlier about the limitations in our development of AI technology, where it goes beyond the bounds of what we've programmed or how we've designed the system. So we might have baked in AI technology, but we can't guarantee that it's going to go beyond its brief. That's my thought behind this. I mean, again, I'd be happy to hear other people's views on this, but there's AI, we've got two separate situations here. We're using it for planning for future and to mimic the, you know, the uncertainty behind human behavior. And then we've got AI for the future that's going to be guiding these craft. And although we've put restrictions around it, how can we be sure it's going to maintain those restrictions? I don't want to come over all Terminator 2 on this, but like, you know, those are always the concerns around where are the limitations in AI technology. And having been a software developer from university, I know how many mistakes I made by not putting a colon or a semicolon or a space in a certain place. Well, in my mind, we're still subject to those same issues. And how can we guarantee that those issues aren't going to come up in the future?
Yeah, I think, you know, the black swan idea, right? This, you know, the unexpected or very rare occasion, and how does the algorithm deal with that? Mike and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago Cruise and the autonomous cars they had out in San Francisco, when this woman gets hit by a different car driven by a person, bounces off that car, winds up landing in front of the Cruise vehicle. Once the sensors, kind of detected that, it was programmed to park. Well, it drags this woman 20 feet and critically injures her. They have to get and now since then, Cruise has basically put their whole entire operation on pause. But I think that's a great example of, whether it was AI, autonomy, whatever word we're using, and I know words very much matter.
I had a conversation with a colleague, Dawn, around that too, around moral decisions with AI. So,
yeah,
if you, we've got all these sensor inputs, and I think there has to be a big distinction too between AI and autonomous systems, right? We've had autonomy for a long time. Basic autopilots on aircraft that you say fly straight and level at 100 knots, it'll do it. But now with sensor inputs and starting to make decision making around this, if you had to make a moral decision, if a drone had no other options, either to hit a tree or, hit an aircraft or, to make an emergency landing in a schoolyard, these are big discussions that no one's really having. And I'm sure these manufacturers are discussing internally. But on my side of things, in terms of risk assessment, how do you risk assess that when you sit around a boardroom table and say, okay, well, the lowest possible risk is landing in a schoolyard, and it could be completely empty, or there could be people there. What is the likelihood? We always talk likelihood and probability. Likelihood and severity to come up with probability of things happening. So that's a really tough thing, and I can't imagine being a software developer having to come up with those algorithms around that.
I'd love to hear Tracy's thoughts.
Yeah, so this is fascinating to me, and especially when you guys bring up the difference between the AI and the automation. One of the really cool things I got to see in the F-35 simulator was something called Auto GCAS, Auto Ground Collision Avoidance System. So it's automated, but you're talking about, well, what's the, do you land in the schoolyard? Do you land here? Do you land there? It's nice to see that at least we're advancing in some areas where the automation is such that the airplane, the auto GCAS system, is designed so that when it senses that the aircraft is going to collide into something, it takes over. The airplane takes over. So they actually had me roll the airplane inverted and pull it towards the ground and let go. Super uncomfortable for a pilot. But the airplane, initially started when it recognized it was aiming towards the ground, it rolled and righted itself and flew away from the ground. So it saves lives. It saved 13 pilots' lives as of taping at that point, from pilots who had G-locked, or they lost consciousness in the airplane, or they got disoriented, in the weather, things like that. So it's an automation, but I'm really curious about how those things can develop with the AI, with the thinking evolving, I'd love to see where that's going to go in the future. I mean, already we're somewhere really, really fascinating.
So you and Matt bring up Matt brought up a very detailed conflict on kind of the same issue, right? So we're talking about general obstacle avoidance, right? We have these systems in our car where they'll stop short if you're coming close to the person in front of you, all sorts of nice warning systems that aren't like full level of, autonomous decision making, but they're driver feedback, etc. But what Matt brought up about is, all right, we have an airliner or a tree. Which one are you going to crash into? The tree is the preferable outcome, but unless that has been programmed as a rules-based response, general obstacle avoidance might just pick the easier object to avoid and say, I could get away from the tree, and now you're into the airliner. So how do you even predict these edge cases? Well, edge cases like that might be more predictable, but there's going to be a whole bunch that we're not going to be able to predict. And I think this is one of the issues that has kind of been almost an impossible hurdle for drone technology. The truth of the matter is these things are going to make mistakes, and the FAA has kind of taken a stance of, we're not going to allow any of the mistakes that we allowed during the formation of our system for commercial air traffic to occur here. So other countries are kind of becoming the test bed because of that. In terms of how these systems, how a software engineer works on this stuff, well, truth is most companies, if they're proprietary, it's actually pretty scary. Like Skydio has a pretty good, autopilot system and obstacle avoidance, whatever, intelligence to it. But I mean, I hear stories about it failing, and when it fails horribly. The other option, and I work for the Drone Code Foundation, so I kind of have a horse in that race, is an open source kind of collection of developers working on obstacle avoidance. So it's not on the individual company. I think that generally makes us safer overall. And that's my biggest concern around AAM is they are very closed door, and the consequences for those larger airframes when they crash or something goes wrong is much higher.
Mike, I think what you just said about the open source kind of gets back to that whole diversity issue, right? When you've got an entire community working on something, holding each other accountable, it just makes it better. So
final thoughts, Matt, before we close the show.
I think this has been a great conversation. Like I said, I mirror Tracy's thoughts on this. I'm excited about AI and AI's use in safety. It's gonna take some time and some development to see how that develops on the aircraft and on the hardware side. But I'm excited to see the application in proactively addressing safety issues.
Yeah, I mean, we want to see simulations of things we can't even imagine, right? So that's kind of what was happening here at Johns Hopkins. So really excited too. So what's coming up, Don? What do we got?
Boy, lots of things. This Wednesday, actually, we on the Dawn of Drones podcast at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern, we've got Hui Tran, the director of the Ames Research Center for NASA on the show, as well as Kevin, the drone guy, Morris from the FAA. So our kind of annual end of year roundup from NASA and the FAA coming up Wednesday. So make sure you join that. And then Thursday, we've got Jake Lahman from Valmont Industries on our Clubhouse, drop an audio chat at 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. So join Maggie Schuster talking to Jake about what Valmont is doing in the energy sector, primarily with drones and innovation. And we got some big announcements coming up next year about the Dawn of Drones and some changes in 2024. So keep your eyes peeled, but it's going to be a great end of year, and we're looking forward to 2024 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for this episode. We are out here.